I've always been interested in art from a very young age. I've always either been drawing. I used to, like, every single school assignment, I would have little doodles on. I remember one teacher was like, every single thing I get from you has a little skull or some kind of little doodle on it. So I'll just keep it up. And I've always just been going with it. My family was super encouraging. I did a lot of internships when I was younger, got to work with different artists from welding to clay building to, I did like a summer internship where we built a huge sculpture. I've done a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And it was great because it kind of helped me figure out what I might want to do moving forward. Then eventually in high school, I went to a magnet school for arts and I got into Photoshop. I got into photography, and then I kind of started learning how to use Photoshop and kind of playing around with things, and then that kind of really got me into learning the Adobe suite. So I started playing with Illustrator, started playing with Flash, I started playing with all the different programs, and I just kind of started learning, okay, I like creating, I like making things. And it didn't really matter what, because at that point I was just doing a lot of photo editing, and then eventually I was doing photography for like local bands, like my friends' bands and stuff. And then they're like, oh, we need a website. So I was like, oh, let me figure out how to do that. So I started learning how to build websites, how to do like t-shirt merchandise and that kind of thing, which eventually led me to getting involved with like clothing companies and venturing out that way. So I always did a lot of work for everybody else, but never really focused on myself or doing my own personal art. And eventually after some point, once I got a little bit more freedom, I was like, you know, I need to start doing it for myself. So once, you know, work kind of slowed down and I had a little bit more time for myself, I just started kind of taking my illustrations and actually printing them. I started investing in my art and just kind of seeing people's reactions after I started putting my art out there. I was kind of motivated from there. People were very encouraging. They liked my art. They're like, hey, look at this. Or they'd start laughing when they'd see a certain illustration, and it just kind of kept the momentum going. I mainly drifted in my personal art more, or I've leaned in more towards illustration and a little bit more towards painting. The painting I do more so for myself, more like a therapy thing. I don't really I don't bring that to Artswalk, or I don't actually sell any of my personal paintings, but it's more like fun to see what I can do with it. And then the illustration, that's kind of what I've put most of my resources into as of lately. But nothing's set in stone. I like to kind of keep it fluid. If I can, you know, bring some other kind of art in, or maybe decide to bring my photography into it, then maybe down the road I might open it up to that. Like when it comes to like painting, there's no edit undo. When it comes to illustrating, and I want my lines to be nice and clean, so if I mess up, I can undo, or I can just, you know, double tap on in Procreate and just erase what I just did. There's definitely a convenience to that, and then being able to make your images more vibrant or more poppy or more bold. I definitely think it's a little bit easier to go digital in that direction. But then there's other times where I'll do something with a little bit more shading, or just it kind of varies. I find a hard time really focusing in on one style. I like to jump around a little bit, but I do find that the convenience makes it a little bit easier to go that direction for sure. I never really kind of dove into why I do the things that I do. It really depends. Sometimes I'll just have a random subject on my mind or something I wanted to do. Like I do a lot of characters, and it's more so to just be playful. Anytime I pick up a sketch pad, most of the time I'm doing like a character that just comes out for no reason. Like I don't sit down and I say like, oh, I'm gonna do this, or I'm gonna, draw this today. I just sit down and I just start sketching, and then I'm like, oh, that looks like a head, and then I turn it into a face, and then I keep going from there. I just kind of let the pencil kind of start walking on the paper and see where it goes from there most of the time. Sometimes I do like go into things with something in mind, and I think things are a little bit easier to do when you do have a plan. I think that's maybe why I'm a little bit slower sometimes, because I don't like to plan for it. I like to just jump in there and get messy and see what comes out of it. Sometimes you end up with something cool, sometimes you end up with nothing, and for me it's more so about the exercise, I guess, than the final piece at the end, whether or not I have something to show for it. It doesn't really matter to me. It's more so about just getting it out on paper, or just getting that session out, I feel like sometimes. I feel like it wasn't until recently when my partner and I started the paint sesh, we started doing that, and that gave us a little bit more free time aside from, the working part, to be able to focus on our art. And that's when I realized like I could maybe start doing this myself. And I'm not making any money as a solo artist on myself, but between that and the paint sesh, I'm able to survive, and it's more comfortable than being a starving artist, or trying to make ends meet by meeting up with one client at a time and figuring it out that way. So that was a recent thing I took up in like November or so. I started sewing. I've had a sewing machine just sitting there for a long time, never did anything with it. I was like, well, like I said, I worked for clothing companies and we would send out CADs, so I'd mock everything up in Illustrator, add, whatever patterns we were gonna have printed, and then send it off overseas. Somebody overseas would, construct it, put it all together. Well, I don't have the budget for that. So, being a creator, I said, let me do it. I know I can do it. I know I can mock up the CADs, I can have fabric printed. I have my own designs that I created, so I made a pattern, I printed it, or had it printed, and then just cut the pieces myself, learned how to sew, had some, my little logo made overseas, had those all sent over, and then taught myself how to sew. I definitely messed up a million handbags before I figured out how to make them, and then kind of got the hang of it, started learning a little bit better, and then I made, I don't know, probably over 100 something stash bags with different patterns that I created, and yeah, it's been fun. For me, it's very important to put my art on something either people will wear, people can use, people will see it, access it, remember what it is, and then maybe come back and get something else for later. As far as the value goes, honestly, I feel like I put so much effort into each one of those little bags, it's probably not worth the couple bucks I'm making off of it, but for now, it's just kind of building the brand or building the artwork up. That I'm not worried about how much time goes into it or if I'm making a lot of money off of it. More so just want to create a platform where I can put my art out and see if people like it. If they don't, kind of see what people like, kind of get a gauge. And more than anything, to help me kind of experiment with my art and be able to grow my art on my own terms. I definitely do prefer some things more than the others. Definitely prefer the illustration process a lot more than having to create. But I think they each have their own give and take. So for me, what I did enjoy about having to learn this whole new skill, learning how to sew, is things like that can humble you. If you haven't really done something if you're used to doing the same thing all the time and you haven't done anything, like, oh, I can do this, it sits you down and says, no, shut your mouth. You don't know what you're doing. You're about to learn today. And yeah, I don't know how many broken needles after, how many times poking myself in the finger or cutting the fabric the wrong way, or after a while you learn, you have to humble yourself. And it's nice to have that little humbling every once in a while too. So that's why I like learning little new skills here and there. So I jump around from one to the other, and so now I'm trying to play around with wood. So I just got myself a table saw, I'm playing around with that, just jumping from one thing to the other. And it helps me balance that creativity. So if I get burnt out here, I can jump here, I can jump around, and then maybe kind of combine them later on down the road. It's right now we're working out of our apartment, and my girlfriend Chelsea and I, we have a 2-bedroom apartment. In 1 bedroom, we have a virtual art studio with 2 huge Costco racks that take up the whole area, and that's all just stuff for the paint sesh. And then that whole room's full. And then the living room, same thing, just work tables everywhere. It's a lot of different projects going on at once, and it's a plus and a minus, I guess. It's super messy, but it lets us be creative. We're not worried about, making a mess. We're like, it's okay if you make a mess, just be creative, do what you have to do, But after a while it gets a little hectic. You're like, okay, there's too much of a mess going on here. I need to maybe rearrange some things, pick things up. But yeah, we don't limit ourselves with creativity. We give each other enough space. We're like, if you need to just destroy the living room for whatever project you're working on, go for it. I know it'll be cleaned up later. It's about just giving yourself as much space to just get crazy with it, I feel like sometimes, because I don't know, I feel like sometimes people are too worried about not making a mess or confining their creative space, and I feel like that's the last thing I want to do when I'm creating. If I make a mess, I'll clean it up later. Just let's get messy first. If I had to go back in time and say, hey, what's one piece of information that you could give yourself that will make yourself a little more resilient or help you out in the future, definitely just do it sooner. Just don't be afraid to jump out of your shell. Follow your passion, whatever your goal is, whatever lights that fire underneath you. Just even if you're not good at it, just start doing it. Because for me, the one thing I realized is that, I've been doing it for a while, but I didn't do it for myself for long enough, and I could have been doing it for myself this whole time, kind of building up my own personal art alongside when I chose to kind of do it for everybody else. So yeah, that would be the main thing I could offer, is just do it. do it sooner, I guess. If you want to know any more, check us out on Instagram, The Paint Sesh, and I am on Instagram at Higher Blend Art, and higherblend.com. All my art is up there. You can check out my products, or if you're on Etsy, look up Higher Blend. I got all kinds of fun stuff there.